everybody. Welcome to this month's Indaba. I'm Heather Ellsworth, your usual host. We have Monica in the background. You usually see her. And then we have our special guests. We have JP and Dan here to talk about the new desktop installer, which is very exciting. I would like to let them talk about themselves a little bit because I think people do a better job introducing themselves. So if you guys, JP, maybe you can start and just talk a little bit how you kind of got here.
Yeah. So hi all, I'm JP and very excited to be here. I'm a Flutter enthusiast based in Sweden, originally from Finland. I started with Flutter a couple of years ago, and I'm also a long-time Linux user. And then I got very excited when I saw Canonical's plans about using Flutter because it was like two of my favorites coming together. And at some point I got a little bit involved with the installer, and then I saw even a job opening, so I couldn't resist. It was like a dream spot. I have a long history of UI development, developing UI toolkits. I used to be all about Qt for a long time. My baby was the Qt Quick Controls 2 project, if anyone has heard about that. But once I tried out Flutter, I just fell in love immediately, and it's been all about Flutter since then.
That's cool.
At Canonical, my main focus has been the installer. Surprise, surprise. And then on the side, also the WSL setup wizard, which is basically just a different variant of the installer. So it has its own set of pages, but it has a shared code base with the desktop installer.
Okay, cool. So I didn't know that was the WSL and setup wizard was in Flutter too. That's cool. And so you've been at Canonical for what, 2 months now? 3 months?
Yeah, about 2 months since July.
Yeah, okay. So a community member that just was too excited. We had to hire you. That's great. It's Mr. UI. And then Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I joined Canonical in January, also with the objective of focusing on installers, but that was on Subiquity. So Subiquity got its start as the server installer, but thanks to a client-server architecture for it, we're able to reuse that in other applications. So we are using it now for the desktop side as well, which is pretty awesome. So during my time here, I've been able to focus a bit on some auto install capability for Subiquity. So this notion that administrators will be able to automate the installs. It already did that, but I did a tool called Auto Install Generator, which lets you bring a Debian installer pre-seed file and convert that over to the auto install format. Then around the time I was wrapping up with that, we were getting started working together with the desktop team on the new desktop installer, Flutter installer project. And so yeah, that's been really great. It's been fun to do this integration work, to take something that was already working for server and be able to make it handle other cases. I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and just for a little bit of context for people that maybe don't know, that maybe they're new Ubuntu users. So the installer used to be based off of Ubiquity, and then this Ubuntu server installer was based off of Subiquity. So we had kind of two things going on. And so one of the really nice things about this new installer is it uses that same backend. So we're kind of consolidating resources there. And that's really cool. Are there any other, like, what would you say kind of the main benefits of using a Subiquity backend are, besides like just consolidating resources?
I think a big motivation on it was a more modern code base that for some time it had been based on the Debian installer project, which did work well, but that there were certain areas that we wanted to make improvements and it wasn't quite working out. So the new the new code base was done. That has given us some other advantages as well. This client-server architecture, I think, is a great direction because we can separate out and have this back-end component that you really could put any installer front end to that you wanted. I've got samples where I just use a bash script in curl, and I'm able to drive the installer to completion with that. So you really could do anything that could talk on a Unix socket and HTTP. So that's really nice from a architectural arrangement, I think. We also have the capability to update the installer live when you boot the ISO. So if we've got a given version of Subiquity on the ISO and there's a newer version of that available, you can choose to refresh that and pick up maybe some bug fixes that might be relevant for your install.
Where do you get to choose that? Is it like part of the install process that asks you if you want to update the backend? Why wouldn't it just go ahead and do that?
So it first waits until you have network so that it can go do that check to see if there is a new version available. But then also, I think, certainly some of our administrators are using this where they really want to have a predictable install. So I do think that's an important use case for all our installers. And so picking up that new version might actually be a bad thing in that scenario, because then that's a scenario that they haven't tested. So just automatically refreshing probably isn't the best choice in that case, because now it's not that predictable install anymore. Some variable has changed. So I do think that part is great. And, maybe just people aren't ready to deal with it right now. It's like, you know what,
right.
no, I'm just hitting next. I don't want to mess with it. And that's fine too.
Yeah. No, that's nice. I mean, for people that don't know what that question's about, they can just choose the default and move on, and it'll be a guaranteed install. So that's cool. Nice. Well, so I think everybody that's here probably wants to see the new installer. So JP, can you show us what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. I have some slides here, so I can share some screenshots of it. Let's see. Can you see it?
No, I think we need maybe Monica to promote it. Yeah, here it comes.
There we go.
There we go.
My fancy slides. So, as you can perhaps already notice, it's not that different compared to the good old Ubiquity. So at this point, we are basically just playing the catch-up game and trying to reach feature parity. We are not quite there yet, but we are moving very fast. And there's a lot of things in progress right now. So even though the release candidate is very close, we might still land several new pages before that happens. What we have so far, here's the welcome page where you have to select the language. Then we have very similar looking dryer install page, keyboard layout selection. Keyboard layout detection has been implemented, but here's the nice thing, this is just the UI on top of it. So the actual logic is actually in Subiquity. So here's one of the key benefits of using Subiquity, because Subiquity already has keyboard layout detection. So we are just sending the key presses basically and getting responses back, and that's it. Put some UI on top of it and be done with it. Nice.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's worth reinforcing. As we're adding new things for desktop, the server installer benefits as well. For instance, we've added time zone support to support it for desktop, but now that support is in place in Subiquity. And so adding that feature is as simple as just adding that to the Subiquity TUI.
Nice.
Yes. So updates and software, the page is there, but it hasn't been really implemented yet. We are working on it as we speak. So there are still many things that are already visible in the UI, but might not have logic behind it. So it's it's just everything is under heavy development. So it's moving. Very same selection between guided partitioning and manual partitioning. If you go to manual partitioning, then you can create the partitions yourself, and there are basically the same dialogues as Ubiquity has. Then you can enter your credentials, usernames, password. Again, looks very similar to Ubiquity. You can select the theme. This is a bit unsure if it will end up to the final installer, because it might fit better to a first-time use application when you enter the newly installed system instead of selecting it already at the install phase.
Or if you did select it at the install phase, maybe do it at the beginning, right?
Yeah,
Go through the whole thing.
Work.
Yeah.
And we are, for example, still missing installation slides. So there is nothing fancy while you are installing. It shows a little progress indicator, but once you are done, then you end up here. There are, of course, many other little pages here and there that are only shown depending on certain conditions. You might not see these normally, depending on how your system is set up. And also showing here many pages that are still being worked on. So connecting to the internet, selecting which disk you are going to use for guided partitioning, security keys. And here's also the installation slides that are being contributed by the community.
Nice.
So that's where we are today.
Okay, cool. So when you put in an ISO, and I think we can link to a daily build ISOs that have this new installer, so folks can try it out. So if you boot up an ISO, then I guess you're given the options of like try Ubuntu or install it. And if you click install it, then we just see everything that you just went through. What about when we click try Ubuntu? Does that launch a GNOME session, and then like Flutter stuff is just kind of on hold?
So currently this new installer, it's on the daily Canary images, and it will actually boot straight to the desktop.
Oh, okay.
So you are already in the full desktop environment when you run this installer. So in that case, try wouldn't do much more than just close the app.
Okay. And you mentioned like we're still kind of working on some pieces. Some pieces don't necessarily have logic behind them. Is there some grand overarching like GitHub issue or roadmap that people can see, like, oh, here's the work that's left to be done, and here's what has been done, some sort of list where checkboxes have been made, like maybe if somebody wants to follow along the progress?
Yeah, so on GitHub, you can see all the tickets that have been labeled with a specification label or something like that. So those are basically screen 1, this and that, screen 2, this and that. And some of those have been already closed because they have been implemented, and there are many open. So that's a good place to follow the overall status. Okay, cool. And here I'm just going to post a link to the GitHub page so that folks can find. I also linked to it in the discourse post, but yeah, I mean, go take a look. And I believe the README has some step-by-step instructions for those of you adventurous souls that would like to clone and build your own version. So this Canary install ISO, I have too many tabs open. There we go. So this Canary install ISO that I think Monica's going to provide a link to, that has the new installer. But if you go to the regular daily builds, it's going to have the old
Ubiquity installer. And then the released version of Impish will have both. And we're still trying to figure out like how a user can choose. But I think the plan is for 2204, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but that's when this installer will be like the one and only. Is that right?
Suppose we're still figuring that out.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to commit to anything that I don't want to put words in your mouth. So good.
Yeah, I believe that for 2110 we are going to have alternate image with this new installer. So those who are feeling brave can try it out and provide some feedback. But,
cool, very good. And if people wanted to get involved sooner, you can hit up the GitHub link and maybe find a panel that needs some work and can contribute a little bit. I'm sure these guys would love to help review some pull requests. Yeah, it looks nice. A question I have, is there any sort of theming that is happening with the Flutter UI? Like, Yaru is our main theme. Is the look, I guess my question is the look of the Flutter UI part going to change as we change our theme?
Yeah, so by default, you would get like the Google Material style design with Flutter, but we have implemented the installer UI using the Yaru Dart theme for Flutter, provided by the community, and it has color scheme that follows the standard Yaru theme. It cannot change the entire appearance of the UI, so it's not like a full style. It's just the theme.
Yeah.
So many of the UI elements, they still resemble the material design. They have a little bit of those material style effects, ripple effects and such, but it's kind of somewhere between Ubiquity and then material UI.
Okay, so like if a flavor like mate or something wanted to pick this installer up and apply their own theme, would that be relatively easy for them to do? Is that something we can expect? Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, how about we take a look at some of the questions that have come in? Where can I get the new installer? Well, I think, excuse me, goodness. I think we kind of answered that. Couple of places, right? You can get it from the GitHub repo or the daily Canary builds. One person says, I don't even know what Flutter is. Oh my gosh. Well, we should definitely talk about that, huh? So you experts, JP, do you want to talk about what is Flutter?
What is Flutter? Yeah, so Flutter is Google's open source UI toolkit. It's relatively young, so I believe the first stable release came out 2018, if I'm correct, and the very first alpha release 1 year earlier. So it hasn't existed very long, but it's a very modern one, of course, because it's a new and fresh thing. And the nice thing about Flutter is that it has all the bells and whistles around it. So you have things like stateful hot reload. So while you're developing, you just save your file and you see the changes on the screen right away. And it even manages to keep the state so that you don't need to navigate to the same page again and enter all the input. It just remembers it. Flutter is based on a language called Dart, which is also Google's thing. It started a bit earlier than Flutter. I believe it started around early 2010s, and it was supposed to replace JavaScript. But that plan didn't quite work out. But then at some point, some guys at Google decided to try out implementing a UI toolkit using Dart, and that ended up being a great success. So here we are. So Flutter comes with the material design set of widgets, and it also has a second set of widgets following the iOS design. So it has a Cupertino style as well. But it it was born as a mobile UI toolkit, but during the last year alone, they added support for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, so all the desktop platforms plus web. So they are moving at rapid speed ahead. So it's really fantastic to see how much things they are adding all the time. So sometimes it's a struggle to keep up with the pace.
Yeah, right. So I think we've like our desktop team has been partnered with Google for a little over a year now to kind of work on this. So it's still pretty new and shiny. Do you like using Flutter? Do you like writing in Dart?
Oh yes.
You find it intuitive and fun.
Yeah, it's like asking you, do you like Linux?
Yes, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I think most developers who actually try out Flutter, they really like it. So Flutter is booming. It's if you look at some Google search stats, it's just the curve is going up like this, and other toolkits are going the other way. So it's at the moment it looks like it's really the future, but we'll see.
So instead of fluttering along, it's like flying along. Okay, cool. Okay, so hopefully that answers. You can also check out like flutter.dev. That's the website where you'll find, Google's Flutter tutorials and stuff. They're pretty good. So I would recommend people that are unfamiliar with Flutter to go check that out. The next question is how best to learn Flutter on Linux? Again, I would say to kind of just go through the tutorial. I don't know, what would you recommend, JP?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything specific about Linux. It's a fully cross-platform toolkit, and anything that you can learn in their own tutorials, it applies on all platforms. So there is a lot of good material on their own website. So there are code labs, there are tutorials, there's anything, and the API reference documentation in general is very good. So they have lots of examples, and they have even interactive snippets so that you can type in code in the reference documentation and it will show you the UI on the site. So it's they have amazing things there.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I played with Flutter about a year ago, and that hot reload is so nice when you're learning Flutter because you can just make a change and see it immediately without like needing to recompile and do all of that jazz. So yeah, I would definitely recommend folks going through that Flutter tutorial and just taking a look at the documentation, which is quite good. Yeah. How much of the Flutter community do you think is using it to develop Linux apps? And how can we attract more over to the Penguin side?
As of today, I have a gut feeling that it's not the most popular toolkit on the Linux side yet, and there are many reasons for that, of course. And one of the things is that Flutter has just entered the game, so it hasn't been available for Linux for a long time. And even at the moment, even though it has reached the stable channel of Flutter, it's still behind an experimental flag. So you even have to enable Linux as a platform for Flutter when you install it.
When is that experimental flag going to go away, or do we know?
I'm actually not sure if the Flutter Snap is taking care of it automatically. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm usually using Flutter straight from Git because I'm hacking on Flutter itself, so it's I need the latest and greatest and so on. But attracting more users to use Flutter on Linux, I guess we are working on that. So just providing a way to nicely bring in existing applications to Linux is probably the best way. So the easier we make it for developers to bring their apps also on Linux, the more we get users, I believe. But then, of course, all the old school Linux developers, if I may say so, I would personally invite them to try out Flutter, because so many developers really love it when they just try it out. That's how I also ended up using Flutter. So I was really curious, what is this thing, because there was so much fuss about it. So I just ended up trying it out, and it's actually pretty nice.
Yeah, and I like that, it was kind of built for mobile applications. And I personally, I'm sure a lot of people also really want to see a Linux smartphone one day. So I could imagine like buying a phone and then seeing this like Flutter installer go through and then launching my various apps as a Flutter app. Like, that's kind of a dream that I had. So I think that's great. I think that people in the Linux community that, also kind of have that shared vision of Linux mobile devices can also maybe find the benefit of using Flutter there for their apps too. And, it's a new shiny thing. Like, it's fun. Like, as developers, we like to go and try out the new shiny thing. And so I would definitely encourage that.
And if you have ever written any C dialect language, then Dart is very easy to pick up. It's one of the selling points of Dart is that they make it very easy. It's kept simple on purpose, so it has a very easy to learn syntax, and sometimes people feel like it's a bit limited, but that's they want to keep it as simple as possible, and that's why it's so easy to learn.
I wonder, Dan, like, I know you're from the Ubiquity side, but like, have you gotten the Flutter bug and just gone to try it out a little bit?
Only a teeny little bit so far. I have been focused on problems mostly in that the server portion of it and integrating the two. But I do say, like a lot of these things that we're talking about here really sound terribly useful, like that whole hot reload. I have done that a little bit with other toolkits. And, the first time you actually play that, if people here haven't seen that, just the ease in which you can make a code change and it's live in front of you. You don't have to think about some sort of lengthy rebuild step and get back to where you are. Like the power of that for the developer really can't be overstated. So, any toolkit offering that is immediately at an advantage. And it definitely sounds looking into more in depth. I tend to be more on the terminal side of things, but next time I play with the GUI app, I think I need to take a look.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, if somebody asks me how can I get involved in writing GUI stuff, I always put people to Flutter. Like, hey, go try this out. We always need GUI improvements. Like, I know from the recent printer Indaba that we're looking for a new GUI for the printer application. So like that could be written in Flutter, or like, any sort of GUI opportunity there, I think would be fun. Sorry, I'm just reviewing questions, trying to pick one. Okay, maybe you guys know the answer to this. How do you build a Dart Flutter module for publication that depends on native binaries? In iOS and Android targets, this is easy, but there seems to be no docs for Linux and Mac and Windows, especially for sharing on the Flutter module directory. I don't quite understand that question, but maybe you guys do?
Yeah, so if you want to take some native library and bundle it into your Flutter plugin, I believe the question is about that. So it's relatively easy if you have a CMake-based project, for example, because the application runner project that come with Flutter applications, they are CMake-based for Windows and Linux. So you can easily take any project that has a CMake build script and include it into your project. And of course, that only works well if it's relatively small project because you don't want to build a huge blob together with your application. So if you are talking about some larger libraries, then of course you need to look at some pre-built deployment options.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, it's okay.
There's a question kind of about snaps, but I wonder if this is going to be a snap when it is released, or is this going to be a deb on, or maybe it's just a moot point because it's going to be in the installer.
Both Subiquity and Ubuntu Desktop Installer are delivered as snaps today. If somebody was doing sort of a different project with this, it doesn't necessarily have to be a snap, but that is the way these immediate projects are delivered to the ISOs.
Okay. Is it large in terms of like how much space it takes on the ISO?
Good look.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah, because the question was kind of with the new snaps on the ISO, basically how big is the Ubuntu ISO? So I guess I'm more curious about like how much of that space is the installer. Is it much larger than the old Ubiquity version, or I don't know, comparable?
So it looks like Subiquity Snap weighs in about 55 megabytes. The Ubuntu Desktop Installer one's a bit larger at 155.
Okay.
But perhaps there's some room to trim that a bit.
Yeah.
See if we can optimize. I don't think we've done any that level of optimization yet.
Okay, good. So that means that there's some slimming to come. Cool. Okay. Well, so I wonder if we could, I think that's kind of all the questions that we have right now. I'm sure more will come in. But in the meantime, both of you are kind of new on this new project. Can you guys talk a little bit about the difficulties that you've encountered, some challenges there between like, bringing in Subiquity instead of Ubiquity, bringing in Flutter instead of, Ubiquity, and then like linking those two? What are some of the like main challenges that maybe the larger community base doesn't know you guys have struggled through?
So this is definitely an area that I've thought about a lot. When you look at the starting point with Subiquity, it wasn't written originally in a client-server model. It got changed to that over time. And anytime you have some software where the client and server are written at the same time, they know each other's details, and you still can end up with a pretty tight coupling between the two. And so by introducing this new client that is written by different people and isn't necessarily bringing the same assumptions to it, then it tends to really expose differences in these assumptions, and that becomes interesting. So one today is the storage section, which if we weren't on this call, JP and I would probably be working on right this second. The current storage API, it works, but it's a little lower level than I think an installer client would be wanting to think about. So to that end, I'm helping a bit on that side by providing a nicer API, and then that should help on the client side, not just for Flutter installer, but for anybody who's interested to be able to take advantage of that. And then it just ends up with lots of little details where, because there was just this single implementation, anybody that comes along just does something slightly different, like, oh, that didn't quite work, like permissions on a socket, or where do we write a log file? There's lots of those little details that we just kind of have to churn through every week and just do those fixes and push through it.
Okay. JP, any like challenges that you'd like to speak to?
I guess on the UI side, those would be mostly related to Flutter. So as awesome it is, it's still relatively new on the desktop space. So of course the behavior is not always as you would expect in a native desktop application. So sometimes there are things like focus handling doesn't feel like as it should be, or scrolling effects, or there used to be drag scrolling enabled on desktop so that you would never ever do that with mouse, right? Dragging.
Right.
Yeah. But those are things that need to be fixed in Flutter itself, of course. And there is still one big thing, like there is multi-window support missing in Flutter. So when we have things like pop-up dialogues, they are actually inside the window, so they are in scene dialogues.
I see.
So
are you submitting any of your changes like upstream in Flutter as well to kind of improve Flutter for our use case?
Yes, so there are even many developers at Canonical that are working on the Linux shell for Flutter engine itself. And then, of course, we are also sending patches to the framework side of Flutter, which is written in Dart. So lately I have been sending patches for mouse cursors, because the current behavior is a bit web oriented. So it's the mouse cursor is turning to pointing hand when you hover a button, for example, which is how things work on web, but not on classic desktop. So,
right.
So I'm proposing some changes if we could make them themeable so that we can change them in the Yarrow theme.
Yeah. And I wonder how it would work with like touchscreen, because my laptop has a touchscreen. So, or maybe there's no difficulties there because it's all.
Yeah, at least you won't have the problem of hovering mouse cursor then if you.
It's true. Yeah.
I guess since Flutter was born as a touch-based UI for mobiles, then touchscreen should work better than desktop.
Probably a good point. Yeah. Do you guys plan to do you plan to like reach a certain point with the development and then make like a giant discourse post that's like call for testing from the community? Or how's the testing kind of being handled so that we can make sure that it's like solid?
Your plan sounds good.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't know if you guys had like a finite list that you're trying to complete before you do something like that. Maybe that's, maybe we could come up with like a list of things. And then, I think we should encourage the community to watch out for a discourse post in the coming cycle, because when it's in, when it is the default installer, whenever that may be, this release, next release or the one after, I don't know, but we want to encourage community to come and help us test and help us find those bugs and report them. Now, do you guys do everything in GitHub, right? So all the issues are in GitHub as well. October is getting ready to start, so there's Hacktoberfest that DigitalOcean runs. You could add like the Hacktoberfest topic to your repo and get, maybe people would find it that way. Just a thought.
Yeah,
I'm kind of doing that in my repos, like making them snap repos to try and get people to come and help. So you could do that too. DigitalOcean's not like paying for advertising or anything. It's just my personal interest. So let's see. So with the slides, because I know you guys were talking about like the slide transitions, how we have those installed. Do those slides get like updated every ISO to kind of show, I think, like the default background and what the apps look like in that release? Are you guys gonna come up with those screenshots from like an impish release, or would you just like kind of copy it over from like the last installer? And
So the slide screen, it's still being worked on. I believe it's currently using the old slides from Ubiquiti. But when it comes to the final slides, I believe it would come from the design team. So
got it. Oh, okay, from the design team. That makes sense. How easy is it, like in your development, to just kind of port things from the old Ubiquiti installer to just kind of drop this in place to see, I don't know, as like a placeholder? Is that something you you can do, or is that just not a thing?
I think it's kind of case by case. There is some code that has come over directly. If it's more of a back-endy type task, Ubiquiti is Python, and so is Ubiquiti, so that can sometimes be an easy transition. There is some specific logic that was just copied over directly. And then other areas, it's not as much, but because Ubiquiti itself, while it is mostly Python, there's other bits and pieces as well, and say shell scripts and whatnot. So those take a little more thought on how to bring over snippets from that. What about on the UI side?
Yeah, on the UI side, it doesn't translate that well because Ubiquiti is Python PyQt by GTK. So it just doesn't map to Flutter. You can take code like that. So Flutter is living its in own world. It's a declarative toolkit, and you build the UI in a bit different way. So I have taken a look here and there, but it's mostly about the logic. How does Ubiquiti do this and that? It's not that I'm able to take any code and throw it into the new installer.
Yeah, it would be too handy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the team at Canonical that is kind of working on this, because I know we have you two here, but it is a larger team, right? So how many folks are there? Because I know there's you two, Olivier, I think Seb and Ken kind of help out too. Is that everybody?
On Ubiquiti's side, Michael Hudson Doyle does a lot there. He hasn't been as involved on this project directly because there isn't a great time zone overlap, but he's been immensely helpful in answering questions for me on just how to do stuff with Ubiquiti. So he definitely counts.
Nice.
And on the UI side, I believe the latest job posting mentions Flutter, doesn't it? So we are definitely looking for more help.
Yeah, we are hiring folks. So maybe Monica can put up a link to that greenhouse post. But yeah, we are hiring for another Flutter person. So please, if this sounds like something that you feel confident you could do and excited to do, like, look how excited these two are. Like, come join our team, right? It's a lot of fun. Make a new shiny installer out of Flutter. It's great. Yeah. So let's see. Let's see. You mentioned that the dark theme, we're not sure if the whole light dark thing would be like an option. Have you considered like other panels, or, well, I don't know that there's market research, but I think GNOME's done some like research studies on like what users like to see. So has there been any sort of study done that you guys know of to suss out any other changes we would like to make from what the Ubiquiti installer looked like? Because right now it mostly looks pretty much the same, like the same kind of panels and such.
Yeah, so
like major changes that we
I mean, there's no shortage of things that we want to tackle.
Yeah, okay.
One of the bigger ones is really good support for dual boot. It's you think about that, and that's tremendously important for somebody who's just trying Ubuntu for the first time. Granted, we've got a lot of options these days in terms of VMs and containers and whatnot, so you're not necessarily having to repartition a disk just to try out Linux. But it's still going to be something that's really important to a whole lot of new users. So that is extremely high on our list for JJ, but it is not going to be in Impish.
Oh, for half a second, I was like, "Who's JJ?" Right, after
Sorry, the next cycle, yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What would you say are like kind of the top 3 main things you guys are trying to like resolve right now? Top 3 things you guys are working on.
Partitioning, and partitioning.
Okay. So for all of that, like manual partitioning folks.
Yeah, so if you look at the current state of the installer, basically partitioning is the last must-to-have feature to make it well usable. Anything else that we are still missing, you can live with, but you just need partitioning to make the installer usable. So what we had so far is that it's just doing guided, so automatic partitioning for you. But of course, we need to provide a way to create partitions manually.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say the 4th thing is besides the first?
Another very complicated page has been the page where you connect to internet, of course, because you need Wi-Fi scanning, entering credentials. It's a complicated thing, so it could be even an app of its own. That has been ongoing for a long time, but it's been a little bit on the side for now. So we have been focused on other things right now. That's also a thing that you can live without.
Yeah. So right now, if someone uses the installer, they should assume no internet, and they should do the guided partitioning, right?
Yeah, that's how it is in the daily canary today.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, like that's fine. Like the ISO should have like the latest versions of packages and stuff, so it's not such a big deal to go without internet to update as you go. Okay. I am excited to go try out this installer, and I hope others do too. And so we do have a couple of new questions. One asks, are there any other plans planned to use in Flutter? I don't really understand what that means. But I think our general Flutter story is that we have the installer. I think the Snap store is written in Flutter now. And then we're trying to, make Flutter apps, snap them. People that are interested to try that out, I recommend go learn a little bit of Flutter and Dart, and then make a little app and then snap it and put it in the store. And it's a great way that you can, disseminate quick changes to your user base and try out a new language and, get excited about a new technology kind of all at the same time. So Canonical and Ubuntu will continue to, I think ramp up our Flutter engagement because it started with the Snap Store and now it's the installer, and who knows what's next, right? So are there any plans? I don't know, but I'm excited for them. And then any comments about ISO size related to limited internet access, download speed? I think I don't know that the ISO size is really going to change that much. We kind of talked a little bit about how big Ubiquity and the installer is, and there's some room to trim there. So I think we can't really say yet how large the ISO is going to be relative to the old Ubiquity one, right? When things are all said and done. But the same, right? Is that the goal? Is there a goal?
Well, yeah, it's as part of the build process, there's oversized checks, and we are tripping those checks at the moment.
Okay.
So I think everybody is in agreement that the plan is to bring the size down to the extent that's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's just like the philosophy with the installer is always just as low as you can go, right? And so any amount of trimming, bike shedding that you can do is good. So I think it's a little too early to say like what that final size will be like relative to what it's like today. But I think you can safely expect it to be slimmer than the Canary ISO that you would get today. But still, like if you have the internet to download the ISO, I encourage you to go give it a try. Are there any final things that you two would like to say about your excitement about the installer? You know, something that you're looking forward to, but you know, with releasing it, are you looking forward to any specific feature, or I don't know, like what's at the heart of your excitement, JP and Dan? We'll start with you, JP.
I must say that these days I'm looking at installers in with whole different eyes, because before it used to be this thing that you just click through, but yeah, now it's a different thing when you're actually living in that world and thinking about all the details and how complicated it actually is. So it's actually quite a brave move from Canonical to start with the installer, because it's definitely not an easy task, and you better get it right, because it's the first impression that the user gets. So
that's a really good point. I never realized that. It's a brand new user. Yeah. Wow. No pressure. What about you, Dan? Like what drives your excitement here?
Yeah, I was just going to make that same new user point as well. You know, it's it really can be someone's first experience with Ubuntu software, and so it needs to be solid. And you know, that applies equally in the desktop side or the server side. If it's not up to snuff, then people are going to find something else. So we've got lots of motivation, and no, it's fun to work on. It's really important from a good user experience. And anything new you're working on, no matter what it is, you're just excited to get it in the hands of users. So you add all that up together, and then it's I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And one other question I had personally. So I used to do a lot of like Debian installs long time ago when I was at HP, and I used like the curses-based installer all the time instead of the GUI. So is there going to still be like a curses-based option?
That would be the Subiquity installer to handle that case. Something to help sort of blend the two images is that we've got this notion of an install source. And so there's a minimal install source and maybe not maximal, but bigger than minimal. But we could also construct things in a way that you could do a desktop install, but use the terminal installer, but having a desktop install source, or vice versa. So yeah, we might be able to address that by being able to support more sources. But then at the same rate, you know, I saw a comment in chat, someone was saying, hey, you know, my internet is not very good. The ISO size really matters to me. So I would like to see, and there isn't like firm plans around this, but I would really like to see that, you know, we're also able to do just a single source ISO as well, not just have, you know, like 10 different options in there, and the ISO size is really large, so that you could say, well, I know which option I want. I don't want to have to download the rest. So I would like to see that, but you know, we'll see if we can make it happen. Yeah.
I think it would always be good to have that kind of text-based if we can, you know. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we've answered all the questions that have come in, and I wanted to take a moment and thank you both for, you know, spending some time here with us today to let the community know about the new desktop installer. I think we come out with a discourse post every now and then, you know, like I think in February, that's when we announced that we were doing this, and you know, so I think it's great to showcase in a live video, like you two people are lovely people that make this happen. So thank you for joining us here today and helping answer community questions. So thanks again, everybody, for attending, and we really appreciate it. If you have any follow-up questions, you can put them in the same discourse post, and we'll be sure to address them, or, you know, get the answers for you. And yeah, I hope to see you all back next time. Let's see the calendar. Next one. Oh, October 29th will be the next Indaba because it's the last Friday of the month, which is 2 days before Halloween. So I hope we can all wear our Halloween costumes to that. So with that, we're going to end a few minutes early, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, chat.